guys, BBI here. I want to stop and say thanks for tuning in and checking out whatever the video is about that's about ready to come up next. If you could take a minute and hit subscribe, I'd greatly appreciate it. And if you enjoy what you've seen here, make sure to hit the like button. We'd greatly appreciate your support. Anyhow, guys, all that aside, let's get on with the show. Well, good morning, boys and girls, all the ships at sea. So this is my new solder pot, one of the four I now own. I did that 32 pill video, and boy, you guys did not let me down. I was so happy. Within a day of me doing the 32 pill, so we're talking the first day of the year, because that came out on New Year's, I had at least 8 guys call me and say, hey, I watched your video, I got this solder pot, I want you to have it, or I want to trade for it, or whatever. And I was able to acquire some really nice pots. I ended up horse trading for this one. The little tiny one that I was using was actually in that video. I don't even own it anymore. A gentleman called me and says, hey, I will trade you for this great big old pot. It's way bigger than anything I'll ever need. What I need is a small one like what you've got. And I said, well, dude, let's do a trade. And he goes, sounds great. So sight unseen, I traded him for this 1950s style pot. Now I've got one that's big and deep that's coming at the moment. Reminds me, I gotta call that cat. I got this one, and then I've got the Play-Doh pot, which you guys seen me use on Facebook the other day. And it's amazing how you can go for years and years and years and years and never have a call for a solder pot, and then once you get one, all of a sudden you're doing everything in it. The reason this is relevant for today's project is we're working on Mr. Scott's 667. Mr. Scott's 667 has been here forever. He called me the other day and he says, man, listen, my 667's been there forever. Can you please take a look at it? And I went over and I looked, and sure enough, it was like the second one up on the shelf. So I said, yeah, I'll grab it. I took a quick look at it and I said, man, it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot wrong with it. Give me a couple days and I'll take a look at it. Well, a couple days came and his turn came, and I hooked it up, and there was nothing wrong with it. So I called him back on the phone. I said, hey, Scott. I said, bud, listen, I would love to be able to tell you that you got 5 burnt transistors in here and all this crap. I said, but I found that the truth will set me free every single time, so I'm going to tell you honest to God truth, is there's nothing wrong with it. Please tell me what you saw going on with it one more time. Well, Scott goes on to explain to me that he would key it up and the lights on the amplifier would dim to 0, and it wasn't putting out no power, and the needle wasn't working, and the dial-a-watt wasn't working. Well, we figured out why the dial-a-watt wasn't working. We're going to come back around to that. But my eyebrows kind of popped up and I went, dimming, huh? So let's talk about your electrical system you got going on. He says to me, well, I've got a little piece of 12 gauge wire running from the battery to the frame. Do you think that's ample enough to hook up the 667? And I just started laughing. Here's his 667. Look at what connector's on it. Worthless. This is maybe good for a 2-meter radio or like a handheld. These connectors are worthless. And then in turn it goes to a butt splice. I said, man, you into sideband? He goes, no. I said, okay, well, we can do a modification there. And I said, are you into this? He goes, no. I said, okay, we can do a little modification there. I said, the biggest thing that you're going to notice is if we put real Anderson clips, real connections. This is a 150 amp Anderson connector, right? actual real deal too. These are the Andrews-Anderson connections, 150 amp. I said, but talk to me about the wire that you have running up from the very bottom of your battery, how you have it hooked up. You come find out it's way too small. He was basically starving the damn thing to death. Poor little old girl. But he did the smart thing. He saw that his power wasn't coming up the way he needed it to, and he quit keying it up, and he sent it up here. And by doing that, he saved himself a small fortune. Man, I just need a flat stock copper. Here we go. Copper schmoo. I'm going to use on this pot. He quit keying it up and he sent it up here, and I said, well, let's do a couple things. Let's modify your electrical system in your truck, and let's really build you some good jumpers. Now, if you guys could, and I know it's so hard for most of you drivers that are out there to get anything done properly, is like unbelievably hard. You're away from home, you don't have all your tools. I'm sure at home you probably have a big shop, or some don't, some do. It's like I got a couple friends, they just live in their truck. They don't even have a house. They maintain a P.O. box someplace. So, us knowing that, I said, man, I don't know. This gentleman sounds like he's really grounded. He's probably got himself a family and everything. And I just, getting the amperage to the amplifier is harder than running the amp, because it's 12 volt and it's DC. So I suggested to him that we build him some good 4-gauge jumpers that'll easily carry the current from his batteries to his Anderson connections. Your connection, you lose so much current at your connection, it's pathetic. That's why we got to oversize it a little bit. The connector that's on his 667, I think, is rated for like 25 amps. And when I used to work with the local CB shop that was here in town, man, he sold those connectors like they were going out of style. And I mean, he'd order them by the hundreds, and within a week they'd all be gone because drivers would just clip them in line, and they weren't thinking anything about it, and they didn't understand what it was doing to the circuitry. And I always thought, man, it's awfully a small connection. He says to me, but they handle it. I guess they do and they don't. So the thing is Scott's starving his amp for juice. And I said, well, let's get you some good power wires. I said, do you got anybody that can run the wires? He goes, well, I can run the wires. I said, do you have anybody that can do a good crimp connection? He goes, no. And I said, well, how about I build you the jumpers? And he goes, okay. Now, these have to be soldered. Your eyelets have to be soldered. No, that's hydraulically crimped. Remember, this is an 0.8-gauge cable. The reason we're going to go with an 0.8-gauge eyelet instead of a 4-gauge eyelet is I want the increased surface area of the eyelet. Then I want to make sure the eyelet's big enough to go around the battery post, whatever it is he has on his truck. Okay. Now, he told me the year, make, and model of his truck. I'm not going to give you that knowledge. You guys don't need to know. So anyhow, this is the first time I've heated this pot up. This particular solder pot. Let's see, I plugged it in at 6:30 this morning. It's now 8 o'clock in the morning. So it took 2 hours to come up to temperature, 2 full hours to come up to temperature, and I'm expecting it's going to take me an additional 2 full hours to come down in temperature. That's what my buddy that traded me this thing for told me. He goes, it's going to take you a while. Well, I've also got to build some kind of insulator plate for the bottom of this thing, because I was sitting there looking at it with a FLIR, and I just had this sitting on this table, on this cloth on my workbench, and I couldn't help but notice that this portion of the solder pot's at 700 degrees and this metal bit's down at about 500 and something degrees, and I thought, my God, I'm going to burn a hole right through my workbench. Please keep in mind, I built the top of this bench to be completely replaced with a lot of ease. I'm just trying to keep myself from creating more work for myself. So I thought, well, I'm going to crimp solder and I'm going to give my new pot a try. Ooh, pretty. This is my Weller solder smoke eater. And we are going to make it smoke in here in a minute. So, my buddy Scott told me he didn't really quite have access to the ability to do it. Now, this concerns me a great deal. I have a friend of mine that owns, operates, and runs one of the largest CV shops in the United States. It's still a brick and mortar building that you can go to. And he was telling me about a guy that had an 8,000 plus watt inverter that he had purchased. The batteries that the inverter were attached to were a full 12 feet from the inverter, and he'd paid a shop to professionally install it. And this is just painful to hear. They'd charged him like $1,200 or $1,300 to install the damn thing. They used aught gauge cable, 1 aught gauge cable for an 8,000 watt inverter. They had used 4 gauge eyelets that they had cut the aught gauge cable down, and then they put the aught gauge cable on a vise or something and beat it until it was flat. Nothing was crimped, nothing was soldered. So not only did he have the wire inadequately sized, he had poor terminals on it. Now, here's the totally messed up thing, is they put like a 100 amp breaker on the thing. Poor guy. And so you go to run his inverter, and his inverter couldn't run nothing. It would just trip into fault mode. So I went in and you see my buddy who runs a CB shop, and they sat down and they did the math together, and my buddy took the time and explained everything to him. Well, that's going to take, to run that inverter is going to take 4 aught gauge wire, 2 runs of it 12 feet long with 4 aught gauge lugs. Everything's going to have to be hydraulically crimped and smoothed together, but it's going to need a minimum of a 600 amp fuse. Unless that guy would have stopped and talked to my friend, he would have thought the inverter was defective. Man, 8,000 watt inverter, you could run a friggin' air conditioner off that thing. Oh, that's pretty. That is pretty. Oh, I love it. I love it. The main reason I wanted this pot is because it's not super deep, so it's not going to take 2 days to heat up. But it's got a huge mouth on it, so I can dip transformers and whatnot in it. And I think this is technically referred to as a melting pot, which means I know it only gets up to about 500 or 600 degrees, which is still more than adequate. But that Play-Doh pot that I have over there, it gets much hotter. We're talking 900 to a bajillion degrees, and bajillion's an actual measurable term. Look it up. That sucker, it gets so hot that when you go to dip anything in it, it's like just a volcanic reaction. So let's go through and dip these, since everything's been hydraulically crimped and fluxed. Oh, she's a bubbling. I love this overheating it up with a torch. Now, if you guys have to have your eyelets done up and you don't have access to a solder pot, which most people don't, you're going to go to Home Depot or Harbor Freight, and they're going to have a welder's section in Harbor Freight. Okay? And in that welder's section, they're going to have a little tiny butane torch. It'll be black, and it's going to look like this. $5 or $6 or whatever. Right below that, you're going to see a roll of solder. All you're going to need is a drill to drill a hole in the eyelet and some sort of clamping device. Clamp the eyelet into the thing, drill a hole in it, get on to smashing the eyelet shut. Get out your torch, heat up your eyelet, fill the hole, and you're done. And then slowly let it cool down. And the trick is to slowly let it cool down. Don't go dunk it in water or nothing, that'll create a cold joint. This thing's gonna be perfect for dipping transformers. I wish it got a little bit hotter. A little bit hotter than what we got going on here, but it's going to get the job done for us. The other advantage to dipping is its anti-corrosion principles that we're going after. You got to think that these terminals are going to be right down there where all the bad stuff lives. The hydrogen gas, the hydrogen sulfide, all that kind of stuff. And the only way to seal that out so it doesn't infiltrate the wire and screw up the connection is going to be to solder it. Otherwise, just the littlest bit of moisture and you're going to start losing your ability to have a good electrical connection. That's why it's so important to me that I solder all of these connectors now. Spend a couple minutes thinking about the environment that the connection's in. Okay, so we got everything dipped. Now to unplug this baby, wait for an hour to come down to semi-solid, and then I can put on some thick old gloves. I can move this thing. And we'll be back and we'll shoot the rest of the video on this little 667. Okay, so I got to shoot me a reference video on what this thing is doing and what it's not doing before I go and I put all the power wires in it. Now the only thing I didn't show on video is me putting heat shrink on everything. So I figured, oh. So that's my alarm that says if you're not awake, get awake. Alright, let's just run around the band here real quick. 1000 watt slug and peak, 1000 average, 5 watt slug and reverse, 5 watt slug between the striker and the 667. Now, I want you to notice that the incoming RF goes down this wire, bypasses the driver section completely and goes directly over to the distribution. So this is a high drive, which means these two switches still work. They're taking the RF and they're bleeding it to ground through these set of resistors, but the variable is disconnected, not physically hooked up to anything. And if you run a high drive radio into this, you want to leave these two switches out. So just radio drive, let me show you that. 80 watts worth of drive, average power, 30, 20 some watts. Output tune is good, or I mean pass through tune is good. So let's go ahead and let's hit the amp. About 550 watts. Pulling about 40 amps. And that's with this crap connection and twist locks and pressure and butt splices and Bob's your uncle. Okay? So this thing is now running. Let me simply do the power wire upgrade to this thing and see how it affects this. So give me just a minute and We'll be back. Okay, so got our power wires installed, and we did a little bit of a power wire upgrade. So let's shut the amp off. 1000 watt slug in peak. Once again, radio drive. Hello. Same 80 watts worth of drive. We were barely getting over 500 before. Hello. So now we're getting close to a solid 6. Hello. 200 bird. So now we've established that we picked up almost 100 watts just by bypassing the fuses and giving this thing the ability to have amperage brought to it. Now you guys got to remember that it's this size wire is more than adequate to carry the amount of amperage this far. Remember, you can have a small piece of wire carry a large amperage over a short distance, but a large amount of amperage in a small piece of wire. So I've got the bigger wire feeding the Anderson clips that are feeding the amplifier. So now we're going to start doing our modifications. One of the things I want to do is I want to get rid of this resistor that's right here. And I want to go over here and I'm going to replace this capacitor that's here and change the input tune. Why do I feel that that is necessary? With the 80 watts of input power, hello, hello, input tune is showing high on the striker, hello, and I'm seeing almost 2 watts of input reflect, and that's behind this resistor, and this resistor is getting smoking crazy hot. So let me do this, and then I'm going to convert it over to class C, which means I'm going to take this here, move it over to ground, and then I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to take this lead here and I'm going to move it over to ground. So we'll get this thing on to class C. It's going to pull less amperage for you. It's going to make this an AM only box, and then we're going to play with the input tune. I bet you we can get the output power to come up even a little bit more than 600 watts. So on that note, we shall return. Well, Mr. Steve, we're at the end of this thing finally. So let me shut this off. Hello. Same 80 watts of drive. Turn the amp on. Hello. Hello. Now we're squeaking up here close to the 800 watt mark. So brother, this is about as far as we're going to take this box, and just by changing your power wire, I think we're going to overcome all of your problems. So change the input tune around, got it to lay down nice and low for you. We went and put a little piece of 316 coax inside the thing. Change out your power wires. This thing is 100% good to go. So on that note, I'm going to put the tin on it. We're going to box it up. We're going to send it back. Mr. Steve, I appreciate your patience. I can't wait for you to hook this thing up and have fun talking on it. Gentlemen, my name is BBI, and without a shadow of a doubt, I am the biggest mud duck in Idaho. Come check us out, www.bbiamps.com. Come follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram. And if this is the first time you've watched me on this little dog and pony show that I call my YouTube channel, click subscribe. Make sure to hit the notification button. That way you know when I do the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing after that. Gentlemen, I appreciate your all support. I'll see ya.